Okay, today I'm going to be presenting on the Enlightenment Inventors and kind of along the theme of necessity is the mother of invention. So the first inventor that I'm going to talk about is Thomas Newcomen, and he was a British ironmonger who noticed the high cost that it was costing mine owners to pump water out of their tin mines. So he and his inventor spent 10 years to invent an atmospheric steam pump. And so as he was inventing this, so it took him 10 years to invent it. But it was actually really similar to a steam pump that another person had invented, whose name was Thomas Savery. So in his invention, so this is a picture of Thomas Newcomen's invention. And so in this one, basically what happens is that the furnace down here at A heats up water and it releases steam into chamber G, and then it's sealed off, and they put out the fire and it cools down chamber G, and so as it cools, the steam condenses and it creates a vacuum that pulls down H, which then pulls this whole thing down, which then pulls this up, and there's a vacuum in this tube, and so it draws up water. And so basically the difference between his Newcomen's invention and Savery's centers around G. So in here, there's two pressures that are basically pulling up the water. It's the pressure of the steam condensing, and then the pressure of the atmosphere pushing down on H. So the true pressure that is being put is from the atmosphere, and it pushing down on this chamber in the vacuum. Whereas the original, chamber G was just sealed off, and it was directly connected to N, so as the steam condensed, it would create a small little vacuum that would pull up a little bit of water. And so it was some of the same principles, but it was way more inefficient, whereas Newcomen was able to see that atmospheric pressure creates even stronger vacuums, and he was able to make a way more efficient system. So it wasn't just limited to the pressure of the steam. So then the next inventor. So Newcomen was kind of just able to combine his knowledge of atmospheric pressure, combine it with a technology that he had already seen in place, and make an even better invention that wound up being way more efficient. Then Jethro Tull, he was an English farmer, writer, inventor, and agronomist. He was, small side note, he was an organ player also, but then he studied law, and so he traveled all around Europe and was a lawyer for a couple of years, but then he retired because he wanted to be a farmer. So on his new farm, he wanted to experiment with all these European methods that he had seen, specifically in Italian and French vineyards. He had noticed that they till the rows in between the plants, and it gives a lot more air for the roots of the plants. And so that kind of goes into his next invention, which is a plow. And so the plow does a couple things. It plows the earth, and then it has a grooved cylinder that then drops seeds right into the dirt, and then it covers up the seeds right behind it. So this allowed him, and it also makes use of organ pedals. So this kind of showed that he was able to combine his knowledge from observing all these European farmers with an actual invention. So he's able to use technology and then what he'd observed in nature in order to make a system that was actually way more efficient. And it's kind of sad because his inventions didn't get recognized for a long time because they were so new and radical. But eventually larger farms saw how much more efficient his method was, and so they adopted it. So the next inventor is Edmund Halley, who you probably know as the discoverer of Halley's Comet. he was an English geophysicist, mathematician, astronomer, and meteorologist. And so, yeah, he didn't discover Halley's Comet, he just realized that the same comet that other people had been seeing was actually, and they had been calling it different things. And he's like, oh my gosh, that's the same comet, and then he really understood Newton's laws of physics, and so he was able to predict when it would come back. But a little lesser known side of Halley is that he was also a diver. And so, like a couple of the other people, he was able to take an invention that already existed and improve it based on his scientific knowledge. So the original diving bell that's been used for a long time, it is basically just this bell that hangs from a ship. And it has air that is trapped in the bell, so that way divers can kind of take a break while they're diving without having to come all the way back up to the surface. And so it's really useful, but sadly, the only downside to this diving bell is that really the only difference between being in the diving bell and being in the surrounding water is that there's air instead of water. You still have all this water pressure from the ocean above you. And so, when you dive deep and you get really bad ear pain, that still happens while you're in this diving bell. And Edmund Halley had a lot of this ear pain. In fact, he had one of the earliest cases of middle ear trauma. So he had really damaged ears because he spent so much time, often more than 4 hours underwater. So to fix it, he invented this thing where you see barrel C it's a sealed barrel of air that then has a hole at the bottom, and it's weighted so it doesn't float, obviously. And so it has a hole at the bottom so that the water pushes the air up, and so then the air comes through these hoses and goes into the diving bell. And I'm not exactly sure the physics behind it, but somehow, because the divers are able to control the amount of air that's in the diving bell, it can release the pressure that they have of the surrounding water. And so that way you kind of get a break even more while you're diving. So those are the 3 inventors. And they all kind of show this idea of necessity is the mother of invention. So, whether it's because you recognize the economic need for better, more efficient mine pumps, or whether you have ear trauma, or whether you can see a more effective way to get plants the nutrients that they need in farming, all these things just make other processes more efficient. And they're really needed by these communities. And so these inventors were able to see those needs and fulfill them through their knowledge of nature and technology and the combination thereof. And so I think it's important for all of us to adopt this motto of necessity is the mother of invention. Because there's all these needs around us, and we can fulfill them through invention, specifically by looking at nature and combining it with technology. Thanks for watching.